Welcome to InFocus Viewpoint. I'm Julie Thompson, your host. Today, we bring you part 2 of a discussion about the form of government in Plymouth and the formation of a charter commission, which would ultimately make recommendations on whether to keep or change or modify the way the town is governed. Joining me again today are Bill Abbott and Michael Hanlon, both gentlemen with long tenures in Plymouth government, serving on boards, committees, and being town meeting members themselves. If you're watching InFocus for the first time, I suggest you take time to view the first episode on this subject by visiting PACTV.org/InFocus. On May 15th, voters will decide whether or not to form a charter commission. If they vote yes, they vote in the affirmative, they will also vote in 9 of 19 candidates to sit on that commission. Today, I'll ask Bill and Michael some of the many questions that we have received when we reached out to the public to ask what they wanted to know about this subject. Bill Abbott is an advocate for keeping the form of government we currently have, albeit possibly with some tweaks. And Michael Hanlon is advocating for a change in our government structure. So let's begin. Bill, in 2 to 3 sentences, why are you advocating for keeping the same form of government we have?
Over the last 20 years, Plymouth has developed an absolutely phenomenal participatory government where all the citizens are part of the government. We have a town meeting that achieved almost perfect attendance just last week. They make the decisions collectively, representing all the different districts in the town. And the town is facing very major decisions in the future for how it's going to be developed. And that should be a broad swath of the citizenry that make that decision. Not a single mayor exercising total power, and not 14 individuals on a city council or town council who meet every week. And generally they haven't got enough to do as it is, so the local brokers or lawyers or somebody that meets the rest of the citizens are frozen out of the process. So talking about a handful of people running the government or the citizens of Plymouth running the government, and I think we have, over the years, developed an absolutely efficient, responsive type of town meeting with all kinds of strengths and checks and balances. It's been carefully put together and constructed, not just all of a sudden, but over a 25-year period. And we can be proud of it. It's actually a model for town meetings in the state.
Okay. Thank you. That is your opinion. And Mike, in 2 to 3 sentences, why do you advocate for changing the form of government?
I'm not as enamored with the town meeting form of government, at least in Plymouth, as Mr. Abbott is. I think there are plenty of reasons to look seriously at changing it. Many other cities and towns in Massachusetts have changed in recent years from a representative town meeting to a town council or a city council. Those towns did not end up in chaos and corruption, as some people would suggest. They've been very successful. Things work efficiently, effectively in those towns. So I'm not sure, and to Bill's point about the citizens elect their representatives, whether there's 135 or whether there's 15. They're still elected to serve and represent the citizens of the community. So the size, to me, doesn't matter. What matters is effectiveness and efficiency. Town meeting meets twice a year. A town council or a city council would meet twice a month and can really make decisions when they need to be made more effectively.
All righty. Thank you. So you both made your statement.
Let's rebuttal?
Okay, quick. Go ahead.
This whole thing about how often town meeting meets is really a red herring. Town meeting can meet on 30 days' notice. It's very simple. The selectmen just announce a town meeting. Citizens can call a town meeting, 30 days' notice. But what we have in Plymouth, we have a beautiful structure in Plymouth called the Committee of Precinct Chairs. That's about 15 people. They're town meeting members. They meet once or every 2 weeks. They can pull things together if necessary in between town meetings, and it works very well. And all the time that I've been a town meeting member and involved in government, never once has town hall said to me they wish they could meet more often. In fact, we asked them those questions. We just finished a charter review, 2 years last summer, which raises the question, why are we doing it all over again? But we finished it, and one of the key questions we asked during that whole review was every person working in town hall, a town manager, the treasurer, do you need to meet more often? Are you getting decisions done on a timely basis? And absolutely every single one of them said yes. we're doing it just fine. If we would try to meet more often, we'd be in meetings all the time trying to decide, warrant articles and everything else. Just it's perfect the way it is. No more town meetings than you already have, because we could work in between town meetings most efficiently.
Okay.
And it works.
Point, counterpoint?
I understand his point. I disagree. I'll give you a perfect example. The library roof took 3 town meeting votes over a 12 to 18-month period. I forget exactly when they happened. The executive branch, the selectmen, and the staff came in. Their first request was $1 million to repair the roof on the library. We need to fix the library roof, of course. They came back 6 to 12 months later and said, oops, $1 million isn't enough. We need another $1 million. That got approved. They came back another 6 or 12 months later. Oops, $2 million wasn't enough. We needed 3. So they could have called a special town meeting on 30 days' notices, but they didn't. They waited, that 6 or 12 months to come to another town meeting. That's not effective and efficient. If you had a city council or a town council, they could have been making those decisions just like that.
Okay.
I think that shows the beauty of our form of government, that it can change, it can react, it can address the facts as they're presented. If this had been a city with a town council, they could have been locked into their position. I mean, Framingham just moved to a city. They got in a terrible mess, where the mayor wanted to put the health department in with the Council on Aging. And it was just no justification for it. It was a big fight within the town between the mayor and the council. It got nowhere.
All right, so you clearly differ on that. Let me get to some of the questions that people wrote into us that want to know. If the voters decide by majority to go forward with the Charter Commission, they will also have voted in 9 people to sit on that commission. How can the voters find out where those 19 candidates, and there are actually 19 candidates on the ballot, where they stand on the issue of keeping or changing Plymouth's form of government? And keep in mind that 15 of the 19 that are actually on the ballot are already town meeting members. So where do people, we'll start with you this time, Mike, how do we find out how people are walking into this, this commission?
Well, there's 2 things that I think of. First of all, Bill and I and 15 or 16 of the other candidates participated in a League of Women Voters debate a couple of nights ago. That was done by PACTV. They can't tell us yet how they're going to present it, but it's going to be in some sort of a format so that people can view this debate. It went on for about an hour. It wasn't really long, but people answered questions. And the second thing is, I just got an email, I'm sure Bill did too, from Scott Smith at the OCM asking for a position statement, 400 words or less, that will appear in the OCM in the next week or 2.
Okay, so everyone will know exactly how each of these candidates on the ballot for this commission stand.
Yeah.
Now, I remember, Bill, last time we got together, you said that it's really the job of everyone who's elected to be on this commission to go in with an open mind.
Absolutely.
Is that possible? Just being realistic.
No, it's a balance. Obviously, you don't go in with a blank mind.
Right.
You're going to have ideas already, and that's perfectly fine. You go in with an open mind. But a key part of a commission, particularly a charter commission, which goes on the ballot to begin with, is to listen to the people. And any review commission that I've been on, for the first 3 months or longer, we don't say anything. We have people come in, they talk to us, we ask them questions about how things are going. Everybody that works in the town hall, citizens, anybody can come in, and we encourage it. The more the merrier. And at the end of that 3 or 4 month period, we're beginning to hopefully get a consensus of where people stand on these things. And then we start making decisions at the commission or charter review committee level.
And all of this will be available
It's
to
all
the
televised.
public. Every meeting,
all these meetings in the past have always been televised by PACTV.
We would have absolutely
They're
televise
wonderful
these,
about that. We meet weekly, and it's actually part of your schedule.
Right,
Charter
it's
Review
important.
Committee.
Yep. Any thoughts on this question about?
Bill is right. I've said the same thing in the past. The most important thing that commission can do at the very beginning is listen to the voters. What do you like? What do you not like? What do you think? How can we improve what we've got? So we all need to have an open mind to a certain degree, but at the same time, I'm sure we all have our own
Well, of
biases.
course you do. Otherwise, you wouldn't be wanting to sit on this commission if you didn't feel like you could add something,
Yep.
or you have a strong desire to maybe fix one or two things. Maybe not everything, but maybe there's a few things you want to fix. Okay, so people will have the opportunity to at least know the position that each of these 19 candidates has taken before they actually vote for them. Okay, and we know that the top 9 are the only ones that are going to end up being on this commission if it is so voted in. Okay. Another question came in. If Plymouth were to adopt a mayor/town council form of government, would all of the volunteer boards and commissions disappear? Would the position of town manager still exist? Would department heads be kept on? And would the hierarchy of management in the government change? We can start with you this time, Bill.
The beauty of what the state is allowing towns to do is basically write their own form of government, and there's a lot of leeway. You could have a mayor, you could have a town manager in a mayor form of government. You can have the two together. There's really no script as to exactly how it should be set up. But I will say, though, I think we all agree that most of your volunteer committees would disappear in a mayor council form of government. There'd be no need for them. There wouldn't be a finance committee and those kind of committees. There still would have to be a board of appeals and a planning board. But typically in a town or a city that has a mayor, it's the mayor that's doing the appointing. So again, you got power concentrated in the hands of an individual, which leads to cronyism, certainly corruption. You're much more apt to have corruption, and that's where you see it, is in a city form of government. There's a lot of lack of checks and balances when you have a single person at the head of the form of the government.
Okay. Michael.
I'm sure the structure of government will change in some way. You asked about committees. To me, committees are advisory. Their job is to bring people, specialists together, people who have expertise in certain areas, to help the elected officials who may not have that kind of expertise make decisions. The committees advise the elected officials. And the elected officials, of course, either have to take the advice or not. It's up to them. So I have no doubt that some committee structures would change, but we don't know if we're going to have a mayor or not. So Bill and others keep saying we're going to have a mayor. We don't know that. That is an option of many options. As far as town staff is concerned, the leadership of town, to me, it's totally neutral. Whether you have a mayor and a city council or a town council, the only thing that might be different would be the town manager. So if you have a strong mayor form of government, you don't have a town manager, but you might have a chief operating officer that would take care of the day-to-day operation of the government. But to suggest automatically that this is corruption, to me, is just ludicrous. It's foolishness. Of course there is corruption out there here and there, but it is not widespread in our country or our state or our city, or our town. So you can't even suggest that there's automatically going to be corruption. That's just craziness.
Okay, I'm going to make 2 points. First, as to corruption, I'm a lawyer, and I do a lot of land use lawyering, which takes me to city councils and town councils for permitting decisions, for developments and projects. And I've been in a lot of different councils in the towns and cities closer to Boston, like Medford, Malden, and I've sat there and watched the process. And it is absolutely, I couldn't believe it, watching the way the trading that's going on between the councilors. They become their own little fiefdom for their own little district, and they trade back and forth permits and development rights for their particular areas. It is rife with potential corruption and sometimes actual corruption. I've been to Revere, I've been to Chelsea, I've been to a lot of these places. The council is a political bucket shop. It's where a lot of these trades are taking place. It's terrible.
Well, is there no oversight?
Pardon me?
Is there no oversight?
Oh, the citizens complain, but they're used to it. Look, just pick up the newspaper. What's going on in Everett right now with respect to their city council? There turns out there's a horrendous controversy because of one of the councilors. But the other thing, I think we need to be square with the voters here. Now Mike says we may not have a mayor, there may not, who knows what we're going to do. We actually just finished a very elaborate 2-year study of our town form under a charter review. It went 2017 and 18, 9 members, I was on it. We looked at all the possibilities in Plymouth and for a 2-year period studied it and then came out with changes to our charter. No sooner did we finish than a handful of people they got paid people to get signatures to put this charter commission on the ballot, and they were the same folks, many of them, that came to us and wanted a mayor, and they were just disappointed that this charter review committee that just finished in 2018 didn't find town meeting and didn't try to throw town meeting out. They were going to keep town meeting, and they wanted town meeting out of it. They wanted town meeting gone. But the one interesting thing is, and I've been down this road, for 30 years now, is that there's fewer people this time that seem disgruntled than ever before. It's really a small handful. Of those candidates, those 18 that Mike referred to that are running for Charter Commission, 5 of them identified the other night as for change. The other 13 were not for change, and they admitted it. They think our current form of government is working just fine with town meeting, and they're willing to stay public. That's the highest number anytime I've seen a poll taken of people that want to maybe not change our form of government. People are happy with the way the government goes. And you don't want to throw out town meeting just to try to then have a blank slate and start over. We've constructed this over 25 years now. We'd be throwing out something. We'd be throwing out the baby with the bathwater, and it makes no sense.
Michael.
I understand that the Charter Review Committee, an appointed committee appointed by the moderator, not elected by the voters, did their work several years ago. We waited to start our campaign until after they had finished their work. It would have been inappropriate to start our campaign in the middle of their campaign.
Right, what they were already doing.
But their job was not to look at other forms of government. The review committee's job, I served in one of those review committees, is limited to reviewing the existing charter and making recommendations on improvements and ways to make things better.
Okay.
It is not to look at other forms of government.
Okay.
So with regard to my committee, we had a committee of 7 or 8 people working on this for the last 2 years. And our message has been consistent. We want the citizens of this community to decide what their form of government is. We have never advocated for a mayor and a city council. We have advocated for a conversation. Let's have a conversation in the community about the form of government. Does what we have work? If everybody loves what we have and they think it works well, then let's keep it.
And the voters will decide
and
that.
The voters will decide.
Yep.
And we will find that out in the first 2 or 3 months of this Charter Commission.
Right. You would hope so. Okay, let's go on to a couple more questions. And we kind of talked about this, that town meeting currently meets 2 times a year, and the 135 unpaid and elected town meeting members representing 15 precincts basically decide on what will be spent and what will be done with the town. Some have criticized this group of town meeting members as being out of touch or not committed to learning all the nuances of what they're responsible for voting on. Others have applauded them for the fact that they truly represent a certain area of the town. So there's a whole bunch of opinions out there on town meeting members themselves, their power, their ability to make decisions, their ability to really, really have the blood and guts knowledge of research on all the things that they need to vote on. So, Bill, why don't you start? You weigh in on what do you think about that, about town meeting members in general?
The one thing that always amazes me about town meeting, you'd think that the 9 town meeting members from a particular precinct would be thinking only of their precinct. That isn't the way it works. First, you very early on know that just representing one precinct, you can't only have 1/15 of the town at heart. You have to reach out and work with all the other town meeting members across the town, and and that's the way it does work, which is really wonderful to see. If I'm in maybe in South Plymouth, but I'm working closely with North Plymouth, West Plymouth, Manamet, Cedarville, wherever, and to do what really is the best for the town, and it works. And the town meeting members are incredibly diligent. You know, one of the things that we were able to do was to build into the current charter requirements for preparation, so they know exactly what's coming before the town meeting before they get there. There's enormous amount of work done. You know, one of the criticisms that I heard from one of the pro-change or pro-mayor, pro-people, was that we voted on the budget so quickly at our last town meeting. But the point is that there's been so much run-up in gathering data and analyzing it and already talking to the treasurer and going through the financial decisions. By the time they got to the town meeting, those matters had been thoroughly vetted. My God, we were almost tired of going over it again and again, so we were ready to vote.
Okay.
We don't just come and look at it as a brand new proposition at town meeting.
Okay. Michael, you have a different view?
I certainly do.
Okay.
Number one, I am not convinced that town meeting members come to town meeting informed and educated on the issues. Bill is right. We have multiple opportunities, the presentation forums, the precinct caucuses, the FinCom puts out these detailed books with all the, there's lots of opportunities for people to educate themselves. My personal opinion is they're not ready. Many people are not ready. Secondly, Bill mentioned the budget. That was a $275 million budget was approved with little or no discussion and debate. And I have brought this up at the precinct chairs in the past, as have other people. We need a presentation from the staff, from the town manager, the finance director, the school committee, on their operating budget. We need that at town meeting. It doesn't have to take hours. It could be done in 15, 20 minutes, a half hour, because we get those presentations. I've seen those presentations from Lynn Barrett. They're very good. We don't get that. But at this past town meeting, we spent 15 minutes listening to a presentation about dogs, cats, and bunnies. That was the last article.
Right.
15 minutes. And then it passed, somebody said, moved the question, and it passed without discussion and debate like that. I voted for it. I supported it. But to have a 15-minute presentation for dogs, cats, and bunnies, and no presentation for $275 million budget, to me is crazy.
Julie, can I respond to this? Because
Go ahead.
was part of that last town meeting. First of all, on the article that Mike speaks about regarding puppies and not having a puppy mill in Plymouth, that was incredible. That was not a town-sponsored article. That was a petitioned article, which meant citizens of Plymouth on their own gathered the signatures and brought that article to town meeting. It was the only one like it. And it got a thorough airing at town meeting. It was controversial in some respects because there was some lobbying against it because of people that might be hurt their businesses and so forth. I just thought it was a wonderful process that ordinary citizens that had a passion for doing something for animals was able to bring an article, explain it, put on a presentation, and see it passed with a very big majority. Now, as far as the budget goes, these things kind of change from year to year. Sometimes we spend an inordinate amount of time in the budget. What's interesting is that Mike complains that we went through some of these budget items in 15 minutes or so. I've been at town meetings which took 2 or 3 days to go through the budget. So over the years, it's a happy, somewhere in the middle is the happy medium. We've had the presentations that he's asked for. We still have the presentations. This year, it's a little awkward because we're not able to meet. We're on Zoom, so this is really not a good example of how the town meeting is supposed to work. But the presentations are made. They're made by the school department, by the town manager. The budget is reviewed first by the town manager, by the selectmen, then the finance committee, and only then does it come to town meeting after it's been thoroughly aired in a town-wide televised presentation forum. We couldn't get any more information. It reminds me of what Benjamin Franklin said, that when they asked what kind of government did he give them, he said, "I gave you a republic if you can keep it." We can rewrite these provisions into the charter they're not always followed. This is one of my frustrations. We have a wonderful charter that's got strong provisions, checks and balances, and then some people ignore it. One of the things I would do if I get on this charter commission is come up with a mechanism which makes sure that the charter is followed, that the master plan is prepared, that the planning board follows the master plan, the Board of Appeals. Having provisions in the charter mean nothing unless they're followed.
Okay. Let me stick on the budget, sort of. A couple other questions came. One of them were the 135 town meeting members are really unable to respond on a timely basis to critical projects or expenditures that come up because they only meet twice a year, whereas a town council would meet twice a month or even on the drop of a dime if they need to. What is the counterpoint to that? I would think being totally efficient with expenditures that it would be easier if you met more often with a budget. Let me start with Michael, then we'll go to you, Bill.
Well, if you have checks and balances, so you have the executive branch and you have the legislative branch. A town council or a city council is going to be the legislative branch. That's where the money gets appropriated. The executive branch spends the money. Starts with preparing the budget. That comes out of the executive branch and gets approved by the legislative branch. Then it goes back and the executive branch gets to spend whatever gets approved. So I don't see that changing in any of the forms of government that we would potentially have. But as I said before, town meeting meets twice a year. Of course we can have a special town meeting. Bill's been doing this for a long time. I've been doing it for 12 years. I've seen one special town meeting called in 12 years. I don't remember, one of the issues had to do with the waterfront and Obery Street. It was a couple of capital projects that they got rejected and they wanted to bring them back and see if they would get approved. Once that's happened in 12 years. So a city council, a town council would meet much more frequently and can address those issues more effectively, in my opinion.
I mean, it becomes kind of puzzling then why would the current town government not want to meet more often if that's the case, because it just is not the case. For example, we had a major proposition came to town, should we have a movie studio on a piece of land in by Exit 3 there in South Plymouth. Big deal. It was going to involve the schools, it was going to involve a big piece of land, big expenditures.
Hollywood East.
High-level people from California were trying to sell the town on it. And decisions need to be made. What did we do? We had a special town meeting. It was no big deal. We worked very well. Town meeting was called. It was I remember it well. The vote was taken, and it turned out that the whole thing was a sham. It was a fraud. I remember the final vote. There were about a half a dozen of us that voted no because we had found out that it was a fraud. But there we rose to the occasion. We met. We decided it. Now, with respect to other articles in the warrant, we spent a long time in the last town meetings just dealing with the fire department and their buildings and where we're going to have a new fire station. And we returned to it and studied it again because we're not quite sure. It's maybe not ready for prime time. We also had a big article this time that the Pine Hills was sponsoring for rezoning and changing some aspect of the zoning that affects the Pine Hills. But during the preparation for town meeting, there were several hearings and meetings before different boards, and the Pine Hills management, to their credit, decided that the article wasn't ready for town meeting. It was not going to pass. So they're going back to the drawing board to see what they can give, where the town will be a little bit of a different trade. But I mean, this is part of the way the system is supposed to work. We asked the town manager, would you like to meet 3 times a year, 4 times a year, 5 times town meeting? And she said, absolutely not. The way it works now is just fine.
Okay. All right. Should we go on to the next question?
Sure.
Okay. There are some who believe that a mayor, town council, form of government would greatly impact our budget, since those positions would have salaries and benefits. It's not clear to many how a mayor or a town council members would be selected. Some have also said that they may be influenced by outside interests. I'd like to get both of your thoughts on this. Why don't we start with you?
Well, how would they be selected? I mean, they'd be, I'm sorry, they'd be elected by the voters, obviously. I mean, people, if we had a mayor form of government, a strong mayor form of government, you would have candidates, just like you have for any race. They would make their pitch to the voters and be elected. You know, there's nuances. In some towns or some cities, they have a 2-year term. Some cities like Boston have a 4-year term for their mayor. You know, I guess you could argue if it's not working out and you've got a 2-year term, you can make that change fairly quickly. A 4-year term's a little longer. But same with the city council. There'd be candidates, and they would make their pitch, and they would be elected.
And they would be elected into paid positions, correct?
I don't know if city councilors or town councilors are paid. I imagine that they're not paid. A mayor would be a full-time job, clearly a paid position. You know, so whatever that is, it might be a couple $100,000 a year. Would that affect a $275 million budget significantly? Probably not. So
I guess the question is, if you went to that form of government and you had town members of the town or city council, if they're not paid, don't we run into the same situation where, which a lot of the questions were about the fact that we have so many people that are on boards and committees that aren't paid, that it's not their full-time job. So a lot of them have other full-time jobs, so that they can't actually devote the amount of time that they would need to be in that position if it wasn't a paid position. I mean, I would think it should be a paid position if you're going to have that group kind of manage the town.
Well, for example, the planning board meets every week.
Yes.
For several hours.
Yep.
Deliberating on their thing. They're not paid.
I know.
The school committee meets every week. They're not paid. I mean, these people love what they do. They're volunteers, and it's great that we have them. So why would a town council or a city council be any different than that?
Well, I think that's the question. Go ahead, because that's a very confusing issue.
I would just say, of course, they're paid. The city councilors in cities are paid, and they're paid handsomely. They vote on their own budgets. I mean, just ask. Just look at any. You can name the various cities, and they're paid. And this is why typically the councilor is a lawyer who's got a local practice. He's trying to get exposure, or a broker, somebody in that business, and they exercise such absolute power in their wards or their precincts or whatever. But this is a very interesting question you asked to begin with. What about the budget? It seems very clear to me that if we went to a mayor and a council, we're going to be paying lots more money than we pay now. And the reason is this. One of the beauties of Plymouth's town government is it's totally nonpartisan. The town manager is independent. She's not political. All our town managers are not political. They're not a member of either political party. The Board of Selectmen don't run as Democrats or Republicans. It's a nonpartisan form of government. No polarization. And that's great. That's the way it should be. If you then turn to a city form of government, it generally changes because the mayor then is not typically nonpartisan, independent like your town manager is. The mayor has a political base. Or he or she is not elected mayor. She's a politician in order to get that position. Therefore, they generally hire somebody else to be the independent manager. So all of a sudden now you've doubled the person at the top. You not only have a political mayor who's a politician, you also have the independent person that's actually the manager. This happens in a lot of these towns that have gone to mayor. So you've added an extra person right there. And the same with the city councils. These city councils that meet every 2 weeks, they're not going to, or every week, they're going to want to be compensated. Even our selectmen get a pittance. But
they're the only ones that get a very small stipend.
The moderator also gets paid something too.
Yes, a stipend. Yep.
Which makes sense. But the once you go to the councils, you know they're always proposing raises and tying it to this or that, and saying if we don't pay them enough, they're not going to be the right people. the advantage that we have right now is we have a nonpartisan form of government. We can just have a string of one, manager and so forth. We don't have to double up as you would with a city.
Okay. Michael, counterpoint.
One of the things that I think about is term limits. One of the ways to control the political process and these ward bosses is, we don't have wards, but I mean, we're all familiar with the big city politics like Chicago and New York and Boston, and we've heard about all of these things. One of the ways to control that is term limits, and I am an absolute believer in term limits at every level of our government, local, state, federal. But it's hard to get initiated. I remember when the Charter Review Committee that I served on several years ago, we brought this up and we discussed it. Didn't happen because we couldn't get consensus. But if you really want to control the political process, that's one way to do it. Term limits.
Okay. All
You
right.
don't have career politicians who build their power base and then, are.
And that's your concern, basically, is the cronyism of
Yeah.
Right.
career politicians. Okay, let's go into another subject. Zoning, land conservation, and development, both industrial and housing, are some of the most prevalent concerns that have been brought up. How would a new form of government, if we had that, affect what is currently done for zoning and for development? We'll start with you, Bill.
This is one of my key concerns. One of the key points I keep trying to make is that Plymouth, because it has such a vast amount of undeveloped land, is facing these decisions ahead of it. We have a very low density of population. The towns that have gone to a mayor form are 5 times, sometimes 10 times denser. In other words, there's not that much land left to develop in those towns. Plymouth, though, is looking at all these decisions to come. Do we want those decisions to be made by a handful of people, by a mayor and a majority of the council? Or do we want them to be made by 135 of your neighbors, people like yourselves, all across the town? It seems to me that a decision where you have so many eyes studying the decision before it's made will be much better for the town people that are going to have to live there. So I think when you're looking at industrial development or housing or any of these issues that need to be voted on or changes of zoning, you want as many people, as many minds, as many eyes that you can get on that decision and not leave it to some town, basically one person, a mayor, or a council of 15 people. I certainly wouldn't entrust my future to any select 15 people in town. I want as many people involved as possible. And if I'm not happy with it, I run for town meeting then and become a town meeting member.
Okay. Michael.
Planning and zoning is part of state law. And planning boards are a function of state law. I mean, they're built into each one of the charters of each community, but they're governed in large part by state law. Some are elected, some may be appointed. Depends on your charter. But state law governs a lot of these things. I don't expect there's going to be wholesale changes in the zoning in this community if we have a different form of government. That isn't going to happen. That is a fear tactic. So, but I think you have to ask yourself the question, how are we doing on planning and zoning in this community today with the current form of government? And I would argue we don't have a zoning or a master plan. We're doing it by the seat of our pants. We have this master plan that's 20, 25 years old and well outdated. It needs to be updated. Of course you have to have a master plan. We don't have a good one. Most of the open land in this town is rural residential, 3-acre minimum lots. And nobody in his right mind builds on that kind of property anymore. They cluster, they do different creative things, as they should. So I don't think our current planning and zoning is working so great in Plymouth. It can be a lot better. And when we talk about economic development, I've been an advocate for economic development with 1,000 acres with the industrial park. What do we get in our current industrial park but what I call pre-engineered metal buildings? We get a few high-quality medical buildings. That's the kind of thing that we need because those buildings pay a lot of taxes.
Right.
That was one of the reasons I was an advocate for raising the building height in the industrial park. We now have a 65-foot building height allowable in this industrial park. Hopefully, they will come.
Okay, and let's just finish up with that on the whole idea of bringing in income to the town. Right now, a lot of the income is brought in by the individual taxpayers versus commercial. And a lot of people think we should have more commercial development, therefore more commercial tax base. Would having town meeting members and the way the government is run now change the possible dynamic of what would be approved? And I know you said that a lot of this has to do with state law, but could that possibly change how much development and how quickly it could be done if it was changed from what you're saying, that you want those 135 eyes on
Right.
everything
It
that's
really
done?
isn't a function of state law. This is a function of local citizens and how they are deciding how their town is going to be developed and who's going to make those decisions. Plymouth right now is on the cusp. If you look just north of here, look to Weymouth, look to Braintree, look to these other towns that Plymouth, as it gets more people, is evolving towards. What do those towns have that we don't have? They have high-rise apartment houses. Where do we want those in Plymouth? Who knows? Do we want them anywhere in Plymouth? But those decisions need to be made by Plymouthians and not by a small group of developer-led councilors. And this is why a council that makes those kind of decisions, 14 people, is going to be heavily lobbied by developers because there's a lot of money involved in bringing in big development. So there's a lot of pressure on them. That breeds, of course, corruption. We've seen it. I've seen it. And much less chance of that happening when the citizens themselves are making these decisions collectively. Now, if something makes sense in Plymouth, it'll be brought to Plymouth, and we'll encourage it, and we'll vote it in. But what I hate are the secret meetings, what goes on behind the scenes, not open government, where you have, again, a handful of people making decisions, meeting with the developers, making proposals that the average person can't keep up with. It doesn't even know what's happening. If this is going on every week at a councilor's meeting, all kinds of things can happen. This town can change radically.
Just on that, you just made me think, would town council meetings also have to be covered so that everyone can see them?
Yeah, you'd think they'd be televised.
I mean, you would assume so,
Right.
right? Okay.
And most importantly, they're covered by the state conflict of interest law.
Which is?
Elected officials
Yep.
are covered by this conflict of interest statute.
Okay.
This is a major issue. Bill is intimately familiar with
Yeah.
because he wrote the thing that got in our town charter.
But it just means that the council himself can't be a developer, but it can certainly vote for it.
Town meeting members are exempt, for some strange reason, from the conflict of interest statute. And this comes up at almost every single town meeting. So we have in our own charter, thanks to a previous charter review committee, we have our own conflict of interest clause that governs town meeting members and town employees. And town employees stand up time and time again and say, we are not covered by this conflict of interest clause. And many of them, some people think, are voting in their own interest. A town council or a city council is not exempt from the conflict of interest clause. This is a state statute. They're governed by that conflict of interest clause. But, everything that Bill says about city councilors who are in bed with developers, everything that he says about this subject is built around collusion and corruption. It's a fear tactic to think that our town government, whether it's a town council, a city council, mayor, whatever, is going to be just corrupt. That's a fear tactic, and I don't agree with it.
It's a fear based on fact. Let me make, first on the conflict of interest. Plymouth has its own conflict of interest rules. When we when I wrote them, when we put them into the charter, I used local counsel, the town's own law firm, and told them I want a conflict of interest section that'll withstand challenge. And together with the lawyer that was representing the town and our charter commission, we wrote that article. It's now been copied in other town meetings. It doesn't matter that town meeting members are exempt at the state level. The town of Plymouth's conflict of interest rules govern. Let me tell you why that's a very sore point with me. When I was in law school, just to understand the process, I became a town meeting member in the town of Watertown, which is a little town right outside of Boston. And I served there while I was in law school, and it was a town meeting dominated by town employees. The elections, you couldn't get near the door to the ballot box, the polling place, without going through a line of town employees handing you cards, who to vote for and everything. It was terrible. It was rife with conflicts of interest, rife with it. And it was absolutely sickening. The only way I got elected was to put my name on a card with 6, 7 other people and say, we do not depend on the town for our income. Mm-hmm. But after I left law school, a few years later, I looked back, Watertown had lost its town meeting. It now has a different form of government. And that's what happens to town meeting. If you don't take care of it, if you have conflicts of interest, you will lose it, as you should. The citizens said, we don't need that. Mm-hmm. We want people to vote free of conflicts.
I believe in this conflict of interest clause in our charter. Mm-hmm. It's very straightforward. If you have a conflict of interest, you have to declare it, number one. Yep. And number two, you cannot vote in your own self-interest. Bill served on the Charter Review Committee that wrote that. I served on the Conflict of Interest Subcommittee that looked at the clause in our charter and actually tried to add some teeth to it, because there is no effective, there is no enforcement mechanism in that clause. It is unenforceable unless, as Bill likes to say, an individual takes somebody to court, and nobody's going to do that. Okay. But certain town employees stand up time and again. They haven't done it in a couple of years, but Bill knows this because he's heard it, and I've heard it. And they refuse to admit that our town charter with the conflict of interest clause has standing. And it does, because it was approved by the legislature or the Attorney General, or whoever approves it. Okay.
All right. So that is on that subject. Interesting. Oh, we have time for one more brief subject before we go into your closing remarks. Combining the school budget with the town budget, sharing resources for maximum efficiency. A lot of people asked about that when we put out our questions about a different form of government. Is there an example of a town meeting form of government or a mayoral and council form of government that successfully has done that? And what is your opinion on it? Let me start with you.
Interesting subject. School departments, school committees have fiscal autonomy, whether it's a city or a town. But some cities have put, for example, I think in Weymouth and Framingham, Braintree and Framingham, the mayor has a seat on the school committee. Mm-hmm. He doesn't control it, but he has a voice and he has a vote on those committees. Mm-hmm. As to the whole issue of consolidation, I think that was implicit in what you were
Yes, there was a couple of questions came through.
I would add, here we are in Plymouth. The school department has its own trash truck that goes around and picks up trash at the different schools. Public Works people have trash trucks. Why do we have 2 sets of trash trucks? Mm-hmm. The school department has snow plows. Public Works department has snow plows. Why don't we consolidate trash collection and snow plowing and let the school department should not be in the business of plowing snow. That's a public works function. Let them do it. Building maintenance. The school department has, I've heard it's 100 building maintenance personnel. The town has 10, much smaller staff. Why not consolidate the building maintenance function under one umbrella? Excuse me. So, and I'm sure there's plenty of other ways of consolidation that could be investigated.
Okay. Do you have a
Well,
opinion
I
on
can
this?
honestly say I agree with Mike on this. This is one issue which really doesn't rise to the form of government, because you could do this under either form of government. In fact, the last commission that I served on, that was an issue that we explored in great depth, whether we could combine the maintenance obligations and the maintenance provisions of the school department with the town. And it should be looked at again. I mean, there's a lot of resistance at the town level. We brought in the DPW director and also the school department. They all, of course, they both want to be independent, but I could see them, I could see the forms of, they began to see the advantage of saving money in combining their operations.
Sure.
Of course, that's got nothing to do with whether we have town meeting or don't have town meeting or
Okay.
have a mayor or whatever. It's just as good government.
Right. So I think that is definitely a question that is not understood by all residents, that the school budget is really autonomous to the town budget. And
Well, there's one thing. When it comes to the education process and how you educate the kids, that is a matter of state law. Plymouth can't get involved in telling the school committee what kind of an educational program for the kids, but they
Okay.
can get involved in things like maintaining buildings
Okay.
and all those non-educational aspects of it.
gotcha. Okay. Let's finish up with this. Are there any questions that you want to ask each other regarding your different views? Clearly, you have very different views on the form of government that either should remain in Plymouth or should change. So, Bill, would you like to ask
Well,
Michael
one question I
something?
have for Mr. Hanlon is, why do you think that getting rid of town meeting and maybe going to a council is going to do anything for development in town, bringing in economic development? What's the connection? I don't understand the nexus.
I don't think I ever said that there was a connection between the two.
Yeah, you didn't.
Economic development is a function of government, of municipal government. I'm not convinced that a town meeting versus a town council or a city council is going to change that dramatically. Bill seems to be of the opinion that if we have a city form of government, we're going to have this dense urbanization, that something bad is going to happen. And I don't agree with that. Bad things can always happen in politics and in government, but that's why we have elections.
Do you want to follow up on that?
Well, I've seen it. I mean, the town hires a consultant that doesn't know Plymouth, and the consultant writes a report. This just happened last year as an example. And they decided there was going to be industrial development all along Long Pond Road, south of Plymouth South High School. And people were appalled. I mean, development along Long Pond Road, across from the Wildlands Trust, all that land there that's been saved over the last 30 years. You're going to put some kind of commercial development. I mean, this is what happens when you have people involved with commercial development, where it's going, that doesn't know the town's fabric.
Okay.
Finally, hopefully that consultant will not be brought aboard again.
Okay. And Michael, is there something you would like to ask Bill about his stance on government?
I was struggling with that thought, but I will ask Bill, since he's been a town meeting member for a very, very long time. I've been town meeting for 6 years. I'm running for my third term, I guess. What do you think about term limits, and should they be incorporated in any charter, whether
Well,
we keep
actually,
the one we got or we have a new one?
Mike, I think it depends on the position. I could see term limits for the top executive, like a mayor. One person over a period of 3 or 4 years should be enough time to show his leadership and should be out at that point. But I do think there's advantage, and I'm not just speaking for myself, there's an advantage in town meeting members not having term limits, because there's a lot of institutional knowledge that gets passed along through the years. The only reason I became a town meeting member as soon as I moved to Plymouth was my part of town, I heard just by grapevine that just up the street there were going to be 4 gas stations on 4 corners of an exit onto Route 3. 4 gas stations, and this is a rural residential area. I said, how could that happen? Well, it turned out the planning board had rezoned it secretly and didn't tell anybody. It was going to town meeting. So I got my papers and ran for town meeting and tried to lead an opposition to it. And we were able to put it down and defeated it. But that's what's the beauty of town meeting members. And you remember these things. If town meeting member was like an open door policy, Mike, it just wouldn't work. You need to have a little bit of the history involved.
Okay. I want to thank both of you. What's really clear here is that and you're very respectful of each other, and I really appreciate that. That we can have a respectable disagreement on issues, and it'll be fascinating to if this does pass and the town does say yes, we want to create a charter commission, and the 9 people are elected onto that commission. It will be a fascinating exercise to watch that process be unveiled, and I can't wait to see it.
Same commission.
It's exciting.
Yeah, right, if
Yeah.
it does happen.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you again.
Right.
And thank you for joining us today. Thanks to Bill and Mike for your participation. And if you want to see replays of the show, watch pactv.org/watch. Please make your voices heard by voting in the town election on Saturday, May 15th. Thank you and good day.